Of Chris McDaniel's America. We're back after a little bit of a break for Christmas and the New Year's. Of course, we don't have Chris back tonight. He is unfortunately, as his job is very busy this time of year because everything piles up while you're dealing with Christmas and New Year's. Everybody waits till the first of the year to start piling on them. But of course, as always, I do have my good friend, Midnight Ride owner, and my own personal Joan Rivers, as he likes to call himself, Jim Cegelski. Jim, welcome back.
Glad to be here, Jack. Glad to fill in.
Goodness, nothing's happened since the last time we were on, right? So we can just go home. I mean, there's nothing at all has happened. Of course, that's not true at all. I mean, we've seen already, to end last year and to start this year, we've already seen some craziness. We've seen terror attacks right down the road in New Orleans. Then we saw someone blow up a Cybertruck outside of a Trump Plaza, an Elon Musk vehicle, a Tesla vehicle outside of a Trump Tower. No, there's no symbolism meant to be there at all, I'm sure. But we also see another congressional session start. And one of the things that really caught my attention, and this is something that's caught my attention for years, but maybe more so this year because of the prominence of a couple of the people that I'm going to point out, and that is just the age of those that are serving in Congress. We had 84-year-old, let that sink in, 84-year-old Nancy Pelosi show up at the House of Representatives on a walker because she just had hip replacement surgery. Now, don't agree with Nancy Pelosi on any political issues, but just to be clear, we wish her a speedy recovery. But that's not the point of what we want to talk about. The question is, should she still be serving? Because again, let's not forget, 84-year-old Nancy Pelosi just won another term. So she's there another 2 years. So again, at what point should we start cutting off? Now, just for you Democrats out there who think we're just going to pick on elderly Democrats, that's not true at all, because there's 82-year-old Mitch McConnell, who again, even though he gave up his power position, he's still serving out his term. Now, he's not running again. I can't remember, Jim, if he's got another 4 years on his term or another 2 years on his term, but either way, he's already into his 80s.
And he shouldn't have been there this term at all.
No. I mean, you've got a guy here who we have seen video evidence of him freezing up while giving interviews. We've seen him trail off. We've seen pictures of both of them fall asleep during session. So again, the question comes in, at what point do term limits come into play? Because again, there's no term limits for the House. There's no term limits for the Senate. Back in the day when the state legislatures appointed the senators, you had they used to take care of themselves, because if you had a new governor, new legislature, they'd probably replace their senators. Now that they're elected, there's a true need for a term limit here. Of course, Jim, I'm sure you've heard the argument against term limits. Oh, we're in a small state like Mississippi. If we don't have seniority, we'll never get anything. I mean, nothing will come our way.
It's a lousy argument.
Exactly.
All that is about kickbacks, corruption, and everything else. And the thing that would solve almost all the problems in our political world here in the United States is term limits. It would solve almost everything.
And it just, again, and I'm not trying to be mean. Yeah, I'm not trying to be mean to them because they're older. But we shouldn't have people dying in office of old age.
And Dianne Feinstein is a perfect example. Mm-hmm. I mean, she literally could not function, and she was still serving as a senator, which, at some point, you got to go, what are these people getting out of this? Why is power so important to a Nancy Pelosi or a Mitch McConnell? What are they getting outside of the fact they're supposed to be serving the best interests of the United States? And I think the answer is pretty clear here. They're getting stuff that they shouldn't be getting out of this.
Absolutely. We'll get to that in a second too, because when you look at the history, again, you talked about Feinstein. Again, just to be fair, so the Democrats don't lose their mind, John McCain, same thing. He shouldn't have still been serving at the time of his death, but he was, even though he was not healthy at all. I mean, you remember, he rushed back from the hospital so he could cast that Obamacare vote. You remember that. That was 100% something that happened. And again, I understand anybody can get ill. Anybody can have something happen at any age. But once you reach a certain age, guess what? It becomes more prone. Again, thank you for your service, but at some point you need to go home. Again, this is a major problem. And your point, because you said, why do they want to stick up there? Well, if you go and you look at a lot of these congressmen, congresswomen, senators, and you look at their net worth when they took office, and you look at their net worth today, you understand why they don't want to give that up.
It's not coming from their salary.
No, even though they do try to give themselves raises every chance they get, but it's insane that here we are in 2025, and we're having to have a conversation about the common sense of instituting term limits. I don't understand why this is still a conversation that needs to be had. I don't understand why this just isn't happening. We have term limits on the president. Again, we see that there is a legitimate reason for there to be a change in power because we don't want a kingdom. We fought a war to get away from a monarchy. So that's the reason why there are term limits for the presidency. But then we go around and we make these mini kings and queens out of members of the legislature. And I think that is a major problem in our country. We always want to believe, and we've talked about this before, Jim, we always want to believe in the red team versus the blue team. We know that that's not true. We know that the red team and the blue team normally get along way better than they do on camera. On camera, they like to put together this, we're in the middle of this big feud, we don't like each other, we're battling it out. But the reality is, they go to the same functions, they get along great. A lot of the battles that you see, now some are real, I'm sure, but a lot of what we see is a battle for show. It's something so that way we can throw this out to you, the voter, and convince you that we're fighting for you, that we're fighting those dastardly Democrats. But the reality is, and we've seen it time and time again, especially when it comes to Republicans, they cave nonstop and come to some agreement. And the reality is the agreement was something that they probably were already wanting to go with all along. It's frustrating. It's frustrating indeed because we could get away from some of that if we got a new guardian every so often. Well, the other argument, Jim, and you've heard this one too, is, well, elections can be term limits. I mean, how many times have you heard somebody tell you, we don't need term limits because that's what elections are for?
Yeah, you hear it all the time, but it doesn't work that way because the incumbent has such a big advantage. Let's face it. If you're in there for 2 or 4 years, you have 2 years or 4 years of publicity that you're already getting. You're getting name recognition. You're getting fundraising. You're getting your kickbacks from the corruption, so you can afford to buy commercials on TV. And an opponent barely has a chance in today's political world because there's such an advantage for the incumbent. So term limits is the only way to fix this problem. But Jack, as you know, the people that have to vote on term limits are the ones that are benefiting from not having term limits.
It's insane because when you look at just the clear evidence of everything, to me it should be easy to convince the public. But it's not easy to convince the public because as much as we don't like Arizona's senator or we don't like California's congresspeople, we love ours.
Yeah, but I think people would vote for term limits. The public would vote for term limits. When it comes to voting out the incumbent, that's a different situation because, as you know, as you said on the show before, comes around, he shakes your hand, you feel like you know him, and you think, oh, this is the greatest guy in the world, even though you're not paying attention to how he actually votes. So when it comes time to cast a ballot for this person, you will do it because you don't know his opponent as well as you know him.
That's 100% accurate, but there's also more at play to it, because again, there are a lot of people, Jim, in public that have bought into that argument that we have to protect the seniority. And here's the thing, seniority can exist still. It's just limited. Yeah. So instead of the Mitch McConnells of the world always having this power and being able to just suck everything dry the way that they have, instead of Nancy Pelosi's of the world, the next time Democrats get power of the House, her trying to become Speaker of the House again, which don't think that's not a possibility because it is. It's probably not likely, but it is a possibility. As long as she's in that office, she is a power seeker. She will, and even if she's not, take a look at the Senate right now. Mitch McConnell he stepped down from his leadership role. But who they elevate is number 2. Thune is a Mitch McConnell disciple who was his second in command. So again, we didn't really gain anything there. But if we had a system in place, we'll say 12 years for both. That's 2 terms in the Senate. That's 6 terms in the House. That gives us time to cycle.
That should be more than enough time for any politician. If you want to stay in the office longer than 12 years, you're doing this job for the wrong reason. You should be able to get anything you want accomplished in 12 years. And if you want to stay in longer than that, you're doing it for other reasons that are not legitimate. Certainly not serving the public.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, again, people, and we're wanting to have this conversation with you because we're wanting you to open your eyes to the possibility. Again, yeah, maybe you've had a senator that you've had for your entire life. He's nice. As Jim said, he knows you by name when he comes to your events. He comes and shakes your hand.
We have one right here in Mississippi, Roger Wicker.
Yeah.
He's a perfect example. He's a nice guy. Yeah. He seems like a nice guy. Very likable on his commercials.
I believe he's a nice guy.
Says the right things on his commercials. But he doesn't need to stay in office for all these years. Cycle him out of there so there is no corruption. If you give these guys 2 terms in the Senate, it'll cut down on corruption by 75%.
The other thing that you hear quite often, is, well, there are politicians out there who believe in term limits. Why don't they just go ahead and not run again? Well, there's an old saying in that, and this is something that people need to hear. If everyone that wanted term limits, Jim, dropped out after 2 terms, they're done. They go ahead and term limit themselves out. Guess what we never get? Term limits, because everyone else in there doesn't believe in term limits. So we have to fight for it. Now, the sad reality is the legislature, whether it's state or national, they're never going to give this to us because they understand that it's going to take away their power. They are addicted to Washington, or in our state, Jackson. They are addicted to being invited to these fancy parties. They get tickets to whatever football game they want. If Ole Miss is playing a big game, they got tickets to it. Not just any ticket, they got box seats if they want it. Same with Mississippi State. If Southern had a decent team, same with them. And that's not just exclusive to our state. Go over to any other state. It's the same thing. There's a certain, again, how many times have we heard people in recent years talk about privilege? Now, they want to associate it with the color of your skin, which I think is bogus. But when it comes to being an elected official, there is absolutely a certain level of privilege. And a lot of that privilege comes with a price tag. Because those football tickets, you didn't just get them because somebody was being kind to you. You got them because somebody is hoping for you to give them a favor. Maybe vote their way.
Yep. Somebody wants something, and it's from a lobbyist or a donor or somebody that wants something from you. So what they're really selling is our tax dollars. They're selling our support for them. but they're selling out the public. They're selling out the people they should be serving.
Absolutely they are. And that's why you need to really strongly think about it. Now, in our state in Mississippi, term limits is basically an impossibility at the moment. And the reason being is we have to get it from the legislature. We have no ballot initiative process anymore. We've got a lieutenant governor in office that has no desire to bring it back. A matter of fact, I read earlier that don't expect it this year. It's not coming back because they understand that they don't want the people to have any type of power. So you have to rely on the legislature. They're not willing to give it. The ones that are willing to give us this, they're always going to get defeated by the others. And they'll come up with every excuse they want. The one thing we can do to push for it is to be very public and very vocal in our demands for it. On a state level, on a federal level, we should be screaming for this, but we're not. We're not because people, again, they've fallen for the lies. They've fallen for every argument that has been thrown out there against term limits. And this is sad to me because, again, you complain about how nothing ever gets done. Nothing ever gets done in Washington. Nothing ever gets done in Jackson. In whatever state you're watching us in, your state capital as well.
Don't you think it would be really great, since we have the presidency, the House, and the Senate right now, they should bring this to a vote for term limits right now, just so we can see who votes against it. Yeah. I'd like to know every Republican who votes against term limits. I want to know who those people are.
And the sad reality is it's going to be the majority of them. And they would probably try to do it in some type of secretive vote, maybe never let it get out of committee so you won't see it.
But they shouldn't be able to do that. That should be a public vote. We should know who is against term limits because I can guarantee you those are your corrupt politicians right there.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing they did with the majority vote. When the Republicans elected a new majority leader, it was a secret ballot because they didn't want us to see who Mitch McConnell had his hands in their pocket. They didn't want us to see that at that time. So we understood that as it was happening. They don't want us to see who's against term limits.
This is the time to bring this to a vote, though. I don't care if it doesn't pass. I mean, it won't pass. You're absolutely right. But we have the right to see who in Washington right now, especially on the Republican side, those people, anybody who claims to be a conservative should be for term limits.
100%.
I want to know which of these people are going to stand up and actually vote for what they believe in or say they believe in.
I agree 100%. And I think that we need to figure out a way to push our members of the legislature. Jim's 100% right. If we could get this now, if we could push them to put it to a vote and we could see firsthand who's standing against this, then we know. Now, here comes the next question. Even if we did see who voted against it, how many of you voters out there actually have the courage to go and vote against that person, to vote them out? Jim, we've seen countless times where we've pointed to, you brought up Roger Wicker. We've pointed to bad votes that Roger Wicker has had time and time again.
Tons of them.
And yet, he still gets reelected. Now, you can maybe make the argument he hasn't had a true viable challenger. I think this last time he probably had two good viable challengers. He lost his home county. He lost his home county. So that tells you something. Yet overwhelmingly reelected in the state. Despite the bad votes. Despite all the other things that you can say to point out the negative. A lot of the problems we have with our elections, and this is the other reason why there is a true need for term limits, Jim, is our elections are too expensive. It's too expensive and it favors the incumbent every time. And that's the other reason why you can't get new blood, because it costs a certain amount of money to get elected. Don't even run against an incumbent senator if you don't have $2 million. I'm just going to say it. If you don't have it, Chris McDaniel, the main host of the show, he had millions of dollars dumped on his head just trying to call him everything besides a Christian. Every name they could. Lies didn't matter. Doesn't matter if it's true. They will attack everything about your character. I've seen it. You've seen it. We've watched it. And because they have the amount of money they do, they can just pour it on. They can put mailers out. Little old grandma goes to her mailbox. She opens up and she's reading all these mailers telling her exactly how terrible of a person Chris McDaniel or whoever the challenger to the incumbent is. So they feel like they're compelled to go back and re-elect the same politician. The same politician they've probably been complaining about, but they'll go re-elect him because they just feel like this challenger must be a scoundrel because I read it on a push card. I saw a commercial that told me this during my stories. Whatever the case, we see it time and time again. So as long as it costs as much as it does to beat an incumbent, there has to be something to tip the scales, or else we're never going to see any type of change. That's the reason why term limits is the key to this whole thing. It's never going to happen. Sadly, I know we're talking about it, but and Jim, maybe you can help me with it. I just don't have faith that the American electorate will do what needs to be done and get out there and demand them.
No, I don't have that faith either yet, Jack. I am hoping things change dramatically in the next few years. I think the one thing I hope America realized is how close we came to losing our country in this last election. And I hope it woke some people up, because if Donald Trump hadn't won in November, we would have lost this country. We would have lost freedom of speech. We would have lost, they were going to rig this system so a Republican could never win the presidency again. And we were going to become slaves to our government. And we were so close to it. I'm hoping it woke some people up and maybe get a little bit more involved. Let's face it. The country's not involved in politics unless it's something major like what happened in November. And even then, that it was our country was heading in such a bad direction. I think people realize that we have to step up right now or it's over. But we have to stay engaged on local elections. We have to stay engaged on state elections. It all matters. And I don't think people realize that yet. And if this isn't a wake-up call to some extent, then they probably aren't ever going to wake up.
And that's my concern. That's my concern, because there is we buy in so much into red versus blue. And with good reason. We've seen Democrats can be insane. But at the same time, we have to understand that when Republicans aren't actively fighting against, again, just a couple of weeks ago, we had another stopgap budget fund, which isn't going to aid us long term. At some point, we have to get this spending under control, which Republicans seem as uncommitted to trying to curb spending as the Democrats are. So again, when we see them not willing to step up and actually fight the Democrats, what are we gaining every time? We're not gaining anything because they give them everything they want. Name the last time, Jim, that Republicans and Democrats locked into a battle that Republicans actually won.
I don't know that I can name one. This better change right now. This better start happening now. Republicans better start winning right now, because we have so much to change in the next 4 years. That we need to start winning. Republicans, if they lose with controlling the House, the Senate, and the presidency, then we're in trouble again. So it has to change right now. Back to what you said about voting Democrat versus Republican. Mm-hmm. Right now, everything has to change during primaries because the Democrats aren't giving us a choice at all.
Yeah.
There's no choice. If it comes down to a Democrat or a Republican on a state or a federal level, local not so much, but on a state and a federal level, you have to vote for the Republican because Democrats are insane.
Yeah.
So, but the primary is where Republican primaries is where you have to really take a look at your candidate and decide if you're voting for an establishment guy or somebody who wants to come in and serve the public for a couple terms and do the right thing. And that's where we're missing out.
I agree. 100% agree. That's where we're missing out. That is a major problem right now. And I don't know how to fix it other than to continue to try to talk about these things and see if we can convince the American public, our state public, to come out and try to fight for stuff like term limits.
The one thing that's happening, though, and I've noticed it since Trump won in November, is politicians aren't stupid. Like the establishment Republicans that are still in the House and the Senate have all of a sudden become MAGA. All MAGA. You can't find a non-MAGA Republican anymore, which in a way is a good thing. But in another way, it's just a smart way for them to survive until Trump's not around anymore and they can go back to their establishment corrupt ways.
And that's a major part of you just nailed on a major part of the problem is we've got a lot of politicians in this country. I can think of one right off the top of my head, Lindsey Graham, who wrapped themselves up in Trump, but they don't believe in anything Trump. They just saw this as an effective way to protect themselves. And in Trump's first term, I hope that this is different this go around. He actually endorsed a lot of the swamp creatures. I'm hoping that that'll finally change this go around. But that I
don't know that that's going to change, Jack, but what's changing is Trump's become so powerful at this point. He's going to get his agenda done because the establishment comes around to him, not the other way around. And so I don't think he's going to get rid of if somebody is stupid enough to go up against Trump in the Republican Party, they will get primaried. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But what's happening is those establishment creatures are pretending or they're jumping on the MAGA bandwagon so they can stay in power.
But then they defeat the proposals that Trump has by hiding behind senatorial procedural stuff. Like we couldn't hit the 60 vote number. They're not willing to do things.
And I'm not saying that might not happen. Yeah. There's a good chance that's going to happen, especially in the House. The majority is so slim. It only takes a couple to stop the agenda. But listen, I don't know what you think of Mike Johnson. Jury's still out to me whether Mike Johnson is the right guy for the job or not at this point. But when Trump made the call that this was his guy, they rallied around him. And listen, I know the Freedom Caucus are the people that believe like we believe.
Yeah.
However, I think at this point, Trump's agenda is what's important. We need to get that agenda through. We need to build that wall. We need to deport these people. We need tax cuts. We need everything that Trump has been promising us. And so if these people rally around this at this point, that's what Trump's going to ask for. And so establishment people are either going to fall in line or he's going to take them out in the midterms.
I hope so. But I'm not optimistic because, again, I've just seen them play the game. I hope to be proven wrong, 100%. But the establishment always seems to be one step ahead of whoever they're playing against, whether it's Trump, whether it's against us, whoever it is. They've always seemed like they're one step ahead. And I hope that's not the case anymore.
I agree with you 100%. The only thing I found encouraging was Trump wanted Mike Johnson to stay Speaker of the House.
Yeah.
And, what's the majority? 1 or 2?
But in that instance, again, and this is my concern here, is in that instance, the battle was, he sided with the establishment because it was the conservatives that we agree with that had a problem with Mike Johnson.
Right.
But Trump backed the establishment. That's a concern for me. When it came to choosing a new majority leader on the Senate side, he didn't even voice anything, even though he knew Thune was going to be an obstructionist.
I guess my point is Mike Johnson and John Thune at this point have come over to MAGA. They might be establishment, but they are saying the right things.
I hope so.
Trump agenda is what their agenda is now. John Thune has come out and said this is Donald Trump's party. And listen, I was with you. John Thune's as establishment as it gets.
Yeah.
But if these establishment guys want to keep their job at this point, they have to be MAGA, and that's the power of Donald Trump. Now, it doesn't solve any problems long term. I'm with you. There's no problems being solved here long term. Establishment creatures, the only way we're going to get them out is term limits.
Yeah.
But right now, they're fighting for their survival by becoming MAGA.
I hope so. And I hope that's 100% the case. I'm just jaded. And I think you are too.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, here in Mississippi, I'll be jaded for life because Chris McDaniel was the much better candidate in the last election we had.
Last three, he's ran.
Governor. Yeah, last three. And because he wasn't the incumbent, he lost.
Yep. Well, I think it's time for us to pay a couple of bills, so I think we'll take a quick break here and we'll come back and continue the discussion. I love our sponsors. I mean, they're the reason we're able to be here. But Jim, is there anything more awkward than having to sit here while the commercials run?
It is a little awkward.
It's a little strange, because we are live, obviously. But God bless our sponsors. I mean, if we didn't have them, we wouldn't be able to bring this content and have this type of discussion. And again, we're not trying to be Debbie Downers. We're not just trying to be negative, but we have to have these conversations because Trump's only got 4 years. If Jim's right and the establishment swamp creatures are trending towards Trump, that's a good thing. But he's only got 4 years. What happens when Trump's gone? They're just going to go right back into their old habits. They may play along, and even then, I don't think they'll play along for 4 years. They'll play along until they're secure, and then they'll go against. If Thune comes up in 2 years, he'll play along for 2 years, and then when he gets reelected, he won't play along. Speaker Johnson, the House, a different story, but the House can't do anything if the Senate's blocking everything.
I think as long as we stay engaged, and I 100% believe MAGA is a movement. It's not a fly-by-night thing. This thing has built over the course of 12 years, and this is a incredible movement that has really, people have just embraced Trump like nothing I've seen in my lifetime, honestly. And it's because, for the longest time, the middle class and the working class in this country were completely ignored. But what I'm trying to say here is the working class and the middle class can't just be happy Trump got elected here this one time in November. They better be just as involved in the midterms in 2 years. They better be involved in getting probably J.D. Vance elected in 4 years. We can't give this country back to the left-wing lunatics nor the establishment, or we're going to be right back where we were last year.
I just, out of curiosity, I went on to Chris's Facebook page, which is one of the places that we broadcast live from, just to see how the comments are shaping. And overwhelmingly, folks are agreeing that we need term limits, but we also need Republicans to grow a backbone, which, if Jim's correct, they will through Trump, but
I'm not saying they're growing a backbone. They're fighting for their political survival.
They're growing it through Trump. Is what I said. Not that they.
Yeah, these are people that they're still self-serving. But don't get me wrong, they're doing it for their own self-interest for survival. But the MAGA movement is so strong right now. They know they have to support this movement because they will get voted out. But it's up to you and me and all the other people that showed up in November to pay attention, make sure we hold these people accountable. If there's an important vote coming up that we need to pass Trump's budget, call your elected House member and senator and make sure that this stuff gets passed. We can't just say, hey, we got Trump in, we're good now, the country's saved. That's not how it's going to work.
No. That's how we got in this mess.
Yeah, that's exactly how we got in this mess. And this is a long-term process. And for the sake of your kids and your grandchildren, you have to stay engaged. And we can't go back to what we were doing, just sleepwalking and we let lunatics take over the country. Yeah. Like people
on both sides of the aisle.
People who hated us took over this country. People who thought patriotism was a bad thing took over this country. And that's a scary thing. I mean, we were the enemy of our government. People who
still are in
people
some
who
cases.
believed in the founding fathers, in the American flag, who believed in God and country. We became the enemies of the country, and that is a frightening thing. And it's because we were sleepwalking. We weren't paying attention to what was going on, and we can never let that happen again.
I agree, 100%, and I hope we don't. But I always am, and I say it on my show, The Right Side, I've said it on this one, I'm always fearful of those once every 4-year voters, because they're the ones that show up, they vote for president in elections, and then can't be bothered for the other elections that are, if not more important, I think they are more important. Your state and local are very important, because if the federal government falls, you need a strong state government. You need a strong local government. But you got too many people that can't be bothered by that type of stuff. Those are your once every 4-year voters. They get so wrapped up, Jim, in voting for a president that they don't pay attention to everything else. They get their guy elected and they just think everything's going to be good after that. They don't understand. Or they look up and they say, well, the Republicans have control. And they just equate Republican with good, and they don't study that there are bad Republicans. And right now, I hate to break it to you, but the majority of the Republicans are probably bad Republicans. They're probably not true conservatives.
I agree with 100% of that. I think we have to, as a society, we have to start, because our schools aren't doing it. Our schools aren't teaching civics. They're not teaching about the Constitution. They're not teaching about the Founding Fathers. We have to start doing it as parents.
Yeah.
I mean, we really have to start teaching our kids and our grandchildren how great this country really is and how lucky they are to be living here. Because it's amazing the number of 20, 25, 30-year-olds out there who don't realize that they're living in the greatest country in the world, which is, it's mind-blowing. And they're out protesting for Hamas or places that are just terrible places to live. I almost said a dirty word, but I don't want to say it. Don't know who's watching, but just terrible places to live. They're out there saying, "Oh my gosh, we have to be more like these places. These third world countries are the places we want to be like." They have no clue. They weren't taught.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, and part of the problem that we have, and we still face in this country, most of our viewers have accepted that the media is not on our side, that the media is not reporting news, they're reporting spin. And I think we saw some of that today, because Trump spoke today, right, Jim?
Yes, he did.
And I didn't see it. I didn't watch it live. I've not seen it yet. But I saw headlines afterwards. And I remember coming in, and I was talking to Jim about it before we came on the air, and I was just like, well, why does Trump want to do that? Here's the headline says this. Why does he want to do that? And Jim's like, that's not what he said at all. Jim, again, you watched it. So tell us a little bit about Trump's presser today and what you saw, and kind of contrast it with some of the headlines.
First of all, Jack, I just want to say it is absolutely incredible that we have a president now that can just stand up and talk for an hour and a half.
Wait, he didn't fall asleep?
No, didn't fall asleep. Can answer any question off the cuff, no teleprompter. He stood up there for an hour and a half, answered every single question, and some of them were your gotcha questions that he's always going to get. Yeah. But he answered them brilliantly. He is a master at this. And of course, you compare him to Joe Biden, it's not even a comparison. But the main reason that he held this press conference was he was announcing another big $20 billion investment in America. And I kept thinking to myself, this is a guy who's accomplishing more out of Mar-a-Lago before he becomes president. Let me tell you another thing that he's doing. He has somebody already in the Middle East. He introduced the guy during this press conference, negotiating the release of the hostages that are being held there. This guy hasn't taken office yet. And that's what he's doing. In the meantime, Biden's doing all this other stuff to destroy what people voted for. Yeah. And this guy is working his butt off for the American people already. I think, I don't know what headlines you're talking about, but I think you're probably talking about Greenland and Canada and the Panama Canal.
There was that. And then when you talked about the release of the hostages, there were headlines that made it sound like Trump was going to put soldiers on the ground if they don't release the hostages. I mean, there were so many exaggerated headlines.
That is a horrible thing because he brought the guy up onto the stage and had him talk. The guy who's trying to negotiate the release of those hostages right now. And what the press should be focused on is, why is Trump doing this? He's not president yet. Why isn't Biden doing this?
Yes.
That should have been the headline. But instead, he has, and what they got out of that was, if the hostages aren't released, Trump has said this before today, all hell's going to break loose. And it should. If they don't release the hostages, we need to go in and get them.
Yeah.
And that's what Trump said. And if the press turned that into, we're invading and starting a war, then
it's crazy. Because again, and you talk about the Greenland, and you talk about Canada, and all this talk about Trump wants to make them states. Now, I think we both knew Canada when he said that. That was more of a
it's a tongue-in-cheek thing that he's saying about the state. But what he's trying to do there with Canada is Canada's getting a really good deal from us right now. We have a $200 billion deficit with Canada because they're getting favoritism from us, and they shouldn't. They should have to pay their fair share. They should have to pay tariffs like we pay tariffs on their stuff, and they should have to pay for the military protection that we give them. That's what Trump's saying there. If they want to become a state, I'm pretty sure Trump would love to have them as a state, and I think there is some advantages to that, but I don't think Canadians are going to go that way.
I'm not sure I want Canada as a state.
But listen. Hey, Trump already won on Canada. He got rid of the worst prime minister in the history of the planet already. I mean, getting Justin Trudeau to resign, the Canadians should be thanking Donald Trump for that. Yeah. And I know most Canadians are celebrating that. On Greenland, he wants it as a territory, as a strategic territory, because China and Russia are running ships by Greenland all the time. They're trying to take over that area. That's part of our part of the world. That's not China and Russia's part of the world. That's our part of the world. And it's a smart strategic move. Plus, they have resources and minerals that we can use. Denmark apparently is doing a lousy job up there because the people are voting to leave Denmark. Yeah. And I saw an interview today with somebody who lived in Denmark, and they said they would love if the United States came up there and took it over. But that's just a strategic military and resources move. Smart. It's a great move.
Entirely different the way it's being reported, though.
Yeah. And then Panama Canal. Let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah.
I mean, this is listen, you and I talked off camera. We have the utmost respect for Jimmy Carter as a person.
He was a good man.
As a president, he was terrible. And that's just the honest truth. The country was a mess when Jimmy Carter was the president, and a lot of it had to do with Jimmy Carter. And one of the things that Jimmy Carter did wrong was after the United States spent trillions of dollars and lost 38,000 people building the Panama Canal, he gave it back to Panama for $1. Yeah. So that is a mistake. Well, now Panama has turned around and is charging the United States a premium for our Navy to go through the canal, for our cargo ships to go through the canal, whereas they're giving China a bargain on that. Yeah. Well, Trump has every right to try to rectify that situation. And I think he will rectify that situation. The way that Trump bargains, and as well as I do, is he speaks strong language to get these people to come to the negotiating table. Yeah. And I guarantee you, he's going to have us paying less to go through the Panama Canal because of it.
I think you're right. And I think that the Panama Canal deal was one of the worst deals in the history of our country. I mean,
it made no sense.
No. I mean, and again, we don't want to speak ill of the dead. He just passed, but at the same time, when you're studying somebody's legacy, you have to talk about their legacy a little bit. It doesn't take away from him being a good person, but Jimmy Carter was a bad president.
Listen, I even caught a glimpse of MSNBC today during the Jimmy Carter, funeral stuff. And even their focus was on Jimmy Carter's legacy after he left the presidency.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's even the left wing can't come up with a whole lot of good things to say about Jimmy Carter as the president of the United States. Yeah. And listen, that's his legacy. It really should be focused after he was president, because his presidency was horrible.
Yeah. I mean, I think he had good intentions. He just was not good at executing. But getting back to the guy that may be replacing him, because again, for the longest time, I think myself and several others referred to Jimmy Carter as the worst president of their lifetime. I don't know that you can say that any longer.
Oh, it's not even close.
I mean, there's some that would argue it was Barack Obama, but I think you got to look at Joe Biden. And if you look at the things that Biden's doing in his closing days, he's enacted another offshore drilling ban, knowing that he's not even going to be there, but he puts in an executive order. He's giving out the Congressional Medal of Honor to people that have no honor, to Hillary Clinton. I mean, George Soros.
People that hate the country.
Yeah. I mean, he's handing it out like it means nothing. And in essence, he's making it mean nothing. Now, Jim, I know you're a sports fan like I am, so I know you love baseball. You know, unfortunately, you're a Cardinals fan. I'm a Cubs fan, so we're not supposed to get along. But I'm sure you remember a few years ago when there was that scandal involving the Houston Astros, where they had a scheme to steal signs and effectively used it to win a World Series. Well, even though it was a big scandal, if you remember, the commissioner at the time, Rob Manfred, he came out and said, well, it's not a big deal, because he referred to the World Series trophy as just a piece of tin. He cheapened his own trophy by doing that because he wanted to protect the deal he put in place with the players. That's essentially what we're seeing Joe Biden doing with these medals he's handing out, because he's making them meaningless by just handing it to anybody. It's crazy, because again, president has that right. He can give it to who he wants. But these type of honors should have meaning. It should be more than a piece of tin. That's the whole reason why I went into that World Series explanation. It's not just a piece of tin unless you devalue it. And that's what's happening right now. We're seeing it devalue.
It's worse than that, Jack. He's devalued the whole country. Mm-hmm. One of the other things that he's just done in the last minute here is he's made 625 million acres of coastline protected from drilling.
Yeah.
Well, Donald Trump ran on Drill Baby Drill. The people of the United States just voted on this issue, mm-hmm. and he's usurping the power of the people of the United States. Donald Trump today during his press conference said that's trillions of dollars.
Yeah.
That's trillions of dollars. We're trillions of dollars in debt.
Yeah.
This is money that could pull us out of debt. But Joe Biden's doing everything he can to sabotage the future of our nation. This isn't the future of Donald Trump. Donald Trump's an old man. He's not going to live very long. Joe Biden's sabotaging the future of your children and our grandchildren.
Yeah.
And people should be irate over that. If he wants to give what now has turned into crappy medals to the likes of a George Soros, who's an enemy of this country, fine, let him do that. But don't sacrifice the future of our children.
Yeah. You know, I mean, it's crazy to me because he's walking out, yet he's going to try to use the power of it. And this is the danger of executive order. I don't care if it's a Republican president. I don't care if it is a Democrat president. We are supposed to have a checks and balances in this country. Yet all too often we see, and again, there are probably some legitimate reasons for an executive order, but we've seen it abused on both sides of the equation time and time again. This is a blatant abuse of executive order. There's no reason for him to do that other than he's trying to be petty. He's trying to start Trump off on a bad foot. Gas prices, after this was reported, gas prices in the area already went up. So you know it's having an effect because those places, when they see anything like this that can affect the future prices, we see the rise in prices. So it's already having an effect. So we know why he's doing it. It is an act of spite. Now, to be fair, Biden, while he's the one signing it, he's not technically the one doing it. I don't think he even knows what he's signing at this point. Democrats have all but admitted that they covered up for his problems for his entire 4 years in office. We were screaming. We saw his mental decline throughout. We saw it during the campaign. So we knew there was something going on, and it only got worse over the course of 4 years, to the point the Democrats had to pivot away from Joe Biden to the worst possible candidate in the history of American politics in Kamala Harris. And I know some, oh, that's just mean. She didn't. Kamala Harris was bad. There's a reason they hid her from the media, because she was terrible. They knew she was terrible. They never wanted her to be the nominee. They went with her for one reason alone. It goes back to the beginning of this show. Campaigns cost too much money. With Kamala Harris, guess what they didn't have to do? They didn't have to start over on campaigning, because her name was already a part of Joe Biden's ticket. So she got to keep all of Joe Biden's donations. Donations that they also reported as new fundraising, so that way they can make it sound like she had way more momentum than she had. Yet, that's the only reason she was. People forget, a year before, they were seriously talking about dumping her from the ticket. I guarantee you they wish they had now, because when they were stuck with her, if they had, and I'm not saying that anybody else would have beat Trump, but you don't think it would been a closer race if a Gavin Newsom from California had been the running mate?
Yeah, if there was a primary, if they had a primary, it would have been a closer race. You're absolutely
or even without a primary, if they had a running mate attached to Biden that could give a competent television interview.
Right.
And again, we're talking about a news media that you and I just pointed out is biased toward their side. So how terrible do you have to be if you don't trust them to talk to those people? That tells you how bad she was. Again, I think with a primary, yeah, it would have been a lot harder. But if they could have had anybody besides her, it would have been a closer race. Trump probably still wins, because there's probably still some animosity to the fact that hand-selected.
If you think about it, this woman spent $1.5 billion on an election, and she lost in a landslide.
Yeah.
That is a bad candidate.
Yeah. And yet, again, there are folks already talking about predicting that she's the front runner for the Democrat nomination.
I hope she is.
I don't see it. I think the Democrats know she is a liability, and they're going to give her flowers now, is the expression folks use. So they'll give her flowers now. They'll talk about how she's the front runner. None of them want her on the top of that ticket in 4 years. Not a single one.
You'd have to be pretty stupid to want her.
Yeah, I mean, it just made sense why they went to her in the first place, because it was their only play if they had to get off of Biden, because they didn't have a primary, because of the funds that were already attached. I don't think there was any chance they could have re-raised that money if they hadn't gone to her. And I think they knew that. So they went to her. The media tried to create the persona that they did. And you and I were both scared for a little bit that they might be pulling it off, because all we were seeing was media reports and seeing polling that they were telling us how far ahead she was. Constantly we were being told that. Obviously it wasn't true, but we were told that, and after a while you get conditioned to believe it, and you look at her in the pre-produced stuff, she came across as likable. Where she didn't come across well is in the unproduced stuff, where she actually had to speak to the public. She was a train wreck. And then you factor in her choice of a running mate. I'm convinced she picked that herself, because Tim Walz was the absolute worst possible pick she could have picked. Yeah. Why she didn't go with Shapiro? Well, we know why she didn't go with Shapiro. Anti-Semitism. I'll say it. That's why she didn't go with Shapiro. She feared hacking off the anti-Israeli folks, which should have never been in her equation, because they don't make up the majority of the country in the first place. But that's who they decided to cater to. So they went and got old Timmy Walz, who was, I thought when we first saw him that he was going to be able to pull off that folksy charm. But man, I didn't anticipate how quick that folksy charm was going to wear off.
Yeah, he just came across as a lunatic, actually.
And creepy.
Yeah, and creepy, yeah.
You know, there were a lot of things in this election that went our way. The fact that the assassin's bullet missed.
I still think that was a gift from God.
But it gave that image.
Yes.
As you were talking about, it gave that image that it will forever. I would say it would be in American history books, but people that write the American history books are probably going to skip the Donald Trump chapters other than to talk about scandals. If you look at but that image is a lasting political image. And you and I think, said it shortly after, because I think you were a guest for Chris. I think you and I did the show shortly after that happened, and we both said that is the moment, I think, that Donald Trump wins the presidency. And I do think that was the moment he won the presidency. I think the Democrats saw that. They had that, and they had the bad performance from Joe Biden in that debate. Those two variables together, the race was over. And then they thought if they could pivot away and go to Kamala Harris, that maybe they could salvage something. Didn't quite work for them, thank goodness. But again, none of it's going to matter. None of our hard work, none of the fight that we've put together to get Donald Trump back in office, to try to move the needle in another direction, is going to matter if we don't hold Republicans accountable. If we're not paying attention to how they're performing, it's not going to matter. And again, as I've said before, I'm extremely jaded. I'm not convinced that Trump's going to get the majority of what he wants done, because I think that there are obstructionists on the Republican side. I think that they are going to say the right things so that way Trump will endorse them. They'll hide behind procedural elements on why they didn't get things accomplished, and we will be frustrated yet again. And when Trump's term is up in 4 years, those same obstructionists, they'll get reelected again and again unless we can figure out a way to force their hand. Now, as Jim said, and I think Jim's right, now is the time. Now is when we need to be forcing their hand and telling them we want term limits. We want you to limit yourself. This country is supposed to be based on limited power, limited government. How can we have a limited government when we have individuals that can stay there for unlimited years? They can be there till their death. Do you really think somebody that has served 42 years, do you think they have your best interest at heart anymore? They might have when they first got in, but do you think they have your best interest at heart now? Or do you think that maybe they have the best interest of the folks giving them the most money to make sure that they get reelected time and time again? I know what I think. Jim, I think I know what you think.
I'm with you, Jack.
It's crazy that this is a discussion we have to have. There is a sense of optimism. I don't want to say that there's not. I mean, Donald Trump getting back into the White House.
I think we're at a crossroads. Donald Trump has given this country a second chance. It's up to all of us to make sure that this second chance isn't wasted. We have a chance to return to our roots. Term limits would be phenomenal. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. Yeah. However, it's a long shot.
It is.
Just to be serious about it, it's a long shot. What we do have to do, though, is stay engaged. And if we aren't going to get term limits, we have to start limiting our politicians ourselves, which means stay focused, follow their voting records, and vote them out if they don't do the right thing.
Absolutely. Well said, Jim. Well, Jim, thank you again for filling in. Hopefully, Chris will get the workload under control and he can be back with us next week. I know he didn't want to miss today. I mean, we were right before going on air when we got the final word that there was no way he could make it tonight. So I know he sends his apologies that he's not here with you guys tonight. Hopefully we get him back next week. But Jim, thank you so much again for filling in.
Thank you, Jack.
Guys, this has been Chris McDaniel's America here on the Midnight Ride Network, your home for the anti-establishment movement. We'll see you again next week.
Looks like you've been sleeping well.
Megan, he's back. The My Pillow guy.
And you're looking good.
Still feeling good.
Well, just when you thought it couldn't get any better, we've got the best pillow ever, My Pillow 2.0.
Wow, it's so soft and smooth.
It's cool to the touch. How did you do that?
Well, we took My Pillow's patented fill and combined it with this new technology that we didn't have back then when I invented My Pillow to bring you the best pillow in history, My Pillow 2.0. Just like all of you, I never imagined that My Pillow could get any better. That's why I haven't changed it in nearly 20 years. Then I heard about a revolutionary new technology, and I knew I had to bring it to you all. My Pillow 2.0 is truly the next generation of My Pillow.
The My Pillow 2.0 is cooler and softer than the last My Pillow. It is so comfortable to sleep on at night. I look forward to going to bed, and I wake up well rested in the morning.
Sleep is all about temperature and height. My Pillow 2.0's patented adjustable fill is going to give you the exact individual support you need from your head to your bed. And now here's where it gets even better. We've all experienced those temperature-related sleep interruptions where you get too hot, you toss and turn, you flip your pillow over to the cool side. Well, all that's gone with my brand new My Pillow 2.0 cooling fabric that's made with temperature-regulating thread.
The best sleep just got even better. Whether you have a My Pillow or not, you need to get the brand new My Pillow 2.0. Call or go to mypillow.com now. Use your promo code, and for a limited time when you buy one, you'll get a second one absolutely free.
You're sleeping even better.
And cooler, too.
And you're looking good.
Feeling good.
I knew you would.
Visit mypillow.com.